Welcome to this episode of The Complete Advisor. It is fantastic to have everybody joining us today. This is going to be a treat. Before we get cooking, though, I do want to say don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button. Leave some comments because I would love to know what you're thinking. And whether you're watching us on YouTube, watching us on Spotify, you can watch us on Spotify, even on iTunes, you can watch us on Apple, or if you're just listening, let me know what you're thinking, but we'd love it if you'd subscribe. That way you get the latest episode as it comes out. Now, this is a very interesting topic to me. We are talking to Sean Pendray of Pendray Financial Advisor Incorporated out of the great state of Florida, and we're going to talk about an area that to me just seems fascinating, and that is an area that you focus on, which is sudden wealth recipients and in working in the legal community. So let's set the table with who you are a little bit, let the people know. So you are a guy, I think I was stalking you on your information out there. I was doing my homework, but I think maybe fourth or fifth generation Floridian.
Yeah.
You like that?
Yeah.
Five? Is it five, right?
Yeah, depending on how you define a generation, 25 years. My relatives that were in Pensacola in around 1900. So my family's been in Miami for 100 years, and Miami's not much older than 100 years. So
that's crazy.
I am an old Miami guy, and I've seen that city change a lot.
I bet.
It is its own world. I love it because it's so close to the States.
Yeah.
Nice.
Nice.
Right.
Okay, well, let's talk. So you're a Floridian. You went to school in Florida, poli-sci degree out of FSU, and then master's in public administration, University of Miami. And we were talking before we flipped the record button. That means you were working on becoming a
lawyer. Yeah, I wanted to be a lawyer for most of my childhood. Once I had any sort of idea what I wanted to do. And those degrees and that path was set in the expectation or the hope that I would go on to be a lawyer. And somewhere along the way in grad school, I started interning at Dean Witter, and my brother was having a lot of success as a broker at Bear Stearns.
Yep.
And he was 7 years older than I was, and I got really interested in financial services and made a left turn and ended up going into this business.
In finance.
Yeah.
So before we let go of the your aspirations of becoming a lawyer, were you wanting to be like a Perry Mason defender, or were you wanting to be like the prosecutor putting people?
I don't know it's a good question. I don't think I've ever had anybody ask me that question. I don't know. I know that people told me I was good at arguing.
Yep.
And had good vocabulary and this, that, and the other, and I hadn't thought it through that much. And I suspect most people who become attorneys don't think it through that much. They just think they know they want to be attorneys, but they really don't know what field, what area they're going to go into until they're out into the world and they're figuring it out.
Yep,
so.
they're watching at home and they're practicing that half turn. When the witness says something like, "Are you sure?"
Right. I think most attorneys, would tell you that growing up they want to be a trial attorney.
I would think so.
And the vast majority are not.
Yep.
So that's one aspiration that people have because that's what you see on TV.
Yeah,
right?
there aren't too many procedural law shows that are like that have a lot of sex appeal where someone's just doing
shuffling paper, right?
So you've gotten into with this background of finance, this interest in the law. You're in a very niche world, and what did you say just a little bit ago when we were off camera? It's a small community that you work with. But what did you say? High walls, wide moats?
High walls and wide moats. It's a very, very niche-y sub-specialization within financial advising. Most of the folks that end up in this world, legal settlement planning, as it's called, are not from financial advising backgrounds. You got a lot of folks from claims, a lot of folks from insurance. You'll get attorneys, and it's probably, the community. You've probably got maybe 1,000 advisors in the country, ish.
Wow.
And if you talk about advisors that have all the capabilities and credentialing that most of the listeners have, which I have, I've got a CHFC, and I've obviously always had like the 6, the 7, the 62, 63, 65, yada, yada, life. Very few, very, very few CFP, that sort of thing. you're not going to get very much of that in this world.
So is it mostly, so let's define the world, and then I'm going to pepper you with questions. 'Cause
Sure.
I have it's just so fascinating to me when you run into these within our world, these niches, and especially niches that maybe you don't run across very often,
Yeah.
because I sure as heck haven't.
Yeah.
So let's define a little bit of who your clients are in this sector that you're working in. But that being said, you do have, in addition to this tranche of your business, you are working with regular
Absolutely.
clients.
We are a boutique. We are exclusive. I do not aggressively pursue external retail clients, but I certainly am happy to work with them, and I have some great ones. I just do it very selectively. And I have two partners who really run that for me, while I like to say I'm a doctor with a specialization. I work on hearts. While I'm doing surgery, if you know anything about doctors and their practices, you'll have a guy that's a surgeon, and then the other guys that don't do as much surgery. My father-in-law is a urologist. He's that guy in his practice, and it's kind of my role. I'm over here doing a lot of surgery, and my partners are managing accounts. They're, portfolio management, trades, et cetera, whatever it may be, client hand-holding, that sort of thing. So that's certainly a big part of our practice, and will continue to be a big area. But it's a bifurcated practice, and I spend my time in this legal settlement planning niche, which I really, really enjoy.
So in this world, I'm going to say what I think, the way I think I understand it, and then you clean up what I say here. So in this world, you run into situations where there's a lawsuit. Somebody is something happens. There is a lawsuit. There's a winner and a loser, and somebody wins their case. They're awarded a large sum of money, hypothetically, and now something has to be done with that money. But that person who receives that money doesn't just get a pile of money from whoever has to pay them. There's some mechanics involved. And then from there, that's where you would come in.
Right.
And then at the same time, there's also, when an attorney wins that case, there's their portion of the settlement. How does that all work, and how off am I?
No, that's a nice synopsis. Look, at the end of the day, we come in and we assist the attorneys, we being myself in my practice, with the matters around the settlement of the case as it pertains to protection of the settlement, growth of the settlement, protection of public benefits, which is often a big issue in these settlements. If you've got someone who's Medicare eligible, someone who's Medicaid eligible, all these sorts of things must be addressed at settlement. And then at the end of the day, you got to manage the money. So, look, I like to tell people, don't get it twisted, don't overcomplicate it. It's at the end of the day, you're still managing money. You're just managing money for a certain sort of folk, and you have access to certain products that are unique and not available in the retail world. So, it's just a much more defined role. I mean, I could give you an example of a case, and that might help you.
Name names.
Well, I wouldn't name names, but I would say that John Doe, who is coming into $1 million, and is on Medicaid and is catastrophically injured in a wheelchair for the rest of his life because of a car accident, is going to have specific planning needs. He may need, at 50, rated age 65 because of his injuries, he might need skilled nursing for the rest of his life. So you're going to have all sorts of income needs, and you're going to have things you need to do with the money to preserve the Medicaid, because only Medicaid pays for certain things. There are all sorts of nuance. There's a lot of nuance and all sorts of complicating factors in this sort of planning. So it's amusing to me when I come into a case with an attorney client and he says, "Here's John Doe. I need you to sit down and do some planning with him." And John Doe says, "Oh, I got a guy." Because with all due respect to the guys out there and the gals out there, this is a whole nother animal. And you're dealing with, all these public benefits. You're dealing with a lot of legal issues. And it took me, I'm still learning, I'm almost 20 years in. things like special needs trust and structured settlements and lien resolution and Medicare, Medicaid, as we mentioned, all sorts of things. What's the attorney going to do with his fee? Is he interested in deferring his fee? The different contracts that are only available institutionally to people who have the proper general agency relationships. Structured settlements, if you've ever heard of them, are essentially SPIAs. But they're not retail SPIAs, they're institutional SPIAs. So you have to have certain contracts to be able to even show those sorts of annuities to clients or to show them to the attorneys for the deferral of their fees. So they're all, special needs trusts. People now have heard of special needs trusts. There are first-party special needs trusts. There are third-party special needs trusts. What's the difference? There is an incredible amount of nuance to the world, and it's not for the uneducated.
It sounds, it sounds like it is an area that is. I can see the specialization. I had no idea that it got that complex. What does oversight look like from the court standpoint? Is there a lot of oversight, or is there?
Well, certainly with minors and with incapacitated, there is. Everything's subject to court approval. So if you're dealing with a kid, or you're dealing with someone who's incapacitated, doesn't have capacity, doesn't have the ability to make his or her own decisions, you're going to have a court hearing, and you're going to have to go present your plan, and you're going to have it blessed by a judge.
Is that a challenge? Because, judges, I assume, are very good with the law, but what's their understanding of financial?
Not great, oftentimes, and judges rotate. So they may go from family law to probate to criminal. So you're constantly. You may have a situation in a given circuit where, like Miami-Dade, for instance, or wherever, where your judges are constantly rotating in and out, and their knowledge is not necessarily where you might want it to be, and so there's an educational aspect, but it's hard to get in front of judges. Judges are so that's a challenge, and judges can throw out plans that they can tell you, nope, don't like that plan, go redo it.
Does that happen a lot? Is that in your experience?
It's happened. Yeah, it's happened to me. It's happened to everybody. Even the most well thought out plan, for some reason they may not like it because of personal preference, or you may have a minor who wants to carve out a certain amount of their money to do something which everybody thinks is perfectly understandable. I had a client recently. She wants to take her child's getting, a few $100,000, and she wants $10,000 up front to take a family vacation, take the child on a family vacation. Sure. The child's been through a lot. I think they want to go to Disney. I don't know. It's
$10,000 to go to Disneyland.
Well,
sounds about right.
It's not just.
No, I've been there. That sounds about right.
Well, it's not cheap. Try Disney Cruise on. But we can't control the courts. We can't control the judges. And there's also there are also GALs appointed, guardian ad litems, who are third parties that have to bless everything. So there is a lot of nuance in this niche, and it is certainly never a dull moment.
So when you're working on these, so is the other attorney involved at all?
The defense attorneys, not typically, other than to grant to grant the release. I mean, the release has to be worked on by both sides. The settlement agreement and release is the document which indemnifies the agreement, right? So when you are doing something like structuring, so one of the foundational things that I do and you can do when you're getting a legal personal injury lawsuit is you can structure some of the settlement into this SPIA. It's called structuring the settlement in legal parlance, what they call it. I mean, we're going to structure some of this settlement. You're going to buy a SPIA for some of the money to guarantee that some of the money grows and pays out over time versus giving someone a cash check for God knows how much money, which typically we all know how that ends.
A Camaro and
right. So we read about those articles all the time, right? So the federal government passed passed legislation to make the income from these particular institutional level SPIAs tax-free to the recipient. So there's no tax bill, nothing from the income produced with these annuities. So and that has to be written into the docs. So, I often, it's just interesting when I get advisors brought into these cases, which happens here and there, and they just don't know about these sorts of things. It's just super far afield. Most of the people in this niche will tell you the same story, and it's my story as well, that, they had a friend or a family member who was an attorney, and they told them about it, and they said, "What are you talking about?" And next thing you know, they're looking into it, and I happen to have come to it from sophisticated advising. A lot of people come to it from, whatever, but it's a different world completely, and it's, again, not to overstate, there's a lot of nuance.
So when you're doing this, because there is so much nuance, does advising a regular client almost seem boring?
Yeah, I wouldn't call it boring, but I tell you, it's how do I put this? It's less. I don't feel as much pressure, certainly, because it's, when you're meeting someone in the breach, when they're settling a case and something has happened awful to them. I almost look at us as triage doctors, right? We're coming in and we're going to try to put full financial advising in front of a client. They may tell us to go fly a kite. My first duty is to at least try to get them to take some of this money over time. It's the first hat I wear before I put on, the FINRA, SEC licensed advisory hat. I'm wearing this hat,
So that's something, I guess that maybe is a preconceived notion that you can strike right now from me is, I guess I was under the impression that when there was a settlement, that there wasn't as much flexibility for the person. It's the defendant, right? Or is it
For the plaintiff?
Yeah, the person receiving the money is the
plaintiff.
Right?
Yep.
Okay. So I guess I was just always under the impression that the plaintiff, it was pretty rigid as far as how they got the money and what was going to happen to it. That's not the case?
Well,
or does it just depend?
The amount's the amount.
The amount's the amount, but how they...
Where they have flexibility under 104A2, which is a tax code for physical injury recipients, PI, which is a huge, huge field. I mean, it could be anything from tobacco to medical malpractice to product liability to, your car crash or, you name it. It's a massive field. Medical, all manner of things.
Sure.
Traumatic brain injury, et cetera. But under 104A2, they can take some or all that money over time through the purchase of the SPIA. So it's the first hat I wear when I walk into a given case, typically, is I'm coming in oftentimes to advise on whether or not the client, first of all, how do you want to take the money?
Sure.
You're getting X amount of dollars net cash, roughly. Okay, so let's talk about that. Let's talk about you. What are your goals? What are your needs? What are your hopes and dreams? What's your debt situation look like? Do you have health insurance? There's all, you go through the normal, fact-finding process, and a lot comes to light very quickly in 30, 60 minutes. And then you can kind of tailor the plan to meet the needs of the client, which is what we should always be doing. Best interest, right? Fiduciary responsibility, and you go in and you put together the right plan.
I would imagine a lot of folks are probably, for a variety of reasons, I would assume that they would be shell-shocked because of whatever the traumatic event was that got them to this situation. But then do you find a lot of folks are, massively jumping income brackets, if you will, or their situation in life, although, subtract out the physical and the thing that just happened, but the amount of income they had coming in before they meet you and after, is it typically a pretty dramatic jump?
Most of my clients are lower end of the socioeconomic spectrum. So you'll be dealing with people oftentimes that have never had any money.
That's got to be an amazing
it's
conversation.
Tough. Yeah, it's very tough because they don't understand. They don't have any frame of reference. There's not many of us out there that know what it's like to have $1 million check handed to them. I don't care where you're from. Even those of us in the profession, hand me $1 million check, and I'm going to probably just put it in a 2-year bond right now and just think about it for a bit, especially with where we are with rates right now, right? But But there is a psychological component, and you're also dealing with people that have typically been through varying levels of trauma.
Yeah.
Losing a child, losing a parent, losing a limb. There's just a lot of very, very tough things that I see on a daily basis. So that's got to be navigated too.
Yeah.
And it's just kind of leaning in and letting people know you're there to help and that you can't change the past, but you can help them move forward and make the best of the situation they're in.
I can see the appeal of working in this area because you really are. When we get into financial services, we are helping people with their nest egg, retire, hopes and dreams. But here, you've got folks that have almost a need that is they have a need that is 100% different, and that would be very interesting, and I would imagine very rewarding work too, of helping people who have been through the ringer come out with some kind of shot at normalcy.
Yeah, it's finite, right? It's very measurable. You can come in and know listen, the reality is that as much as I'd like to be a full advisor to a lot more of these people, a lot of them don't have the bandwidth for that. So you're coming in to secure the boat, right? Mm-hmm. And if you can walk away knowing half of their money is in a guaranteed SPIA and it's going to be there for years to come to support them, you did good for them. And you may not be doing a full financial plan as much as you'd like to in a perfect world. We don't live in a perfect world, right?
That's right.
So
how much is SPIA and then how much is I know that we have new product that is coming into that marketplace that is maybe a little bit of a disruptor. How big is that coming in?
Would have been a lot bigger 10 years ago because we just got, finished up with the longest running bull market in history.
Yep.
Historically low interest rates. So, God, did we need some sort of market access product for the last decade or so?
And then there wasn't.
There was nothing. There was nothing. So I've been trying to convince people to take some of their money over time, in a record low interest rate environment.
Yep.
For the last decade. So it's been nice to see rates come up for me, selfishly, and also selfishly for them. But there's still a need, I think if you're going through your checklist as an advisor and you're, from a best interest standpoint, giving the client the options that they deserve, and you have the ability to show them something that has some market access and still has a floor on the downside, you have a duty to do so, right?
Yeah.
You have a duty to have that conversation and let them say, no, I'm perfectly happy with 5% tax-free. Which is what we're seeing right now, which is pretty darn good.
It'll be fascinating to watch as we do move forward because rates go up, rates go down, and it's just the craziest things. I remember back from let's call it 2008 when it's just like, man, when are these? Everything was we think rates are going to go up, and we waited
12 years, 13 years.
And then we blinked our eyes, and the next thing we know, it's like, bam, rates are all the way up there again. So, markets cycle, and we'll go through whatever cycle. But having that option has got to be nice. Yeah. But let's go back. So when you're working with folks, and they bring you in, so it's really their attorney. That's so the big relationship is you with a network of attorneys.
That's what I spend 90% of my time doing is building relationships with attorneys.
And then it wouldn't be, and then that would even get narrower because it would be the specific attorneys that are working with that.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
How did you fall into this niche again?
Actually, one of my very best friends is a 1%er in that field. He's a phenomenal personal injury attorney and has a very successful practice. And he came to me one day about 18, 19 years ago and said, you really should look at this niche working with lawsuit recipients like I work with. We have these tax-free annuities we can show them and special needs trust, and I'll never forget it. I looked at him because I was always the money guy, and he was always the law guy. And I'll never forget looking at him and saying, "There's no such thing as a tax-free annuity." And what are you talking about? And he said, "Well, I beg your pardon, but there is in fact in my world, and let's discuss this." So I made some phone calls and talked to some people, and the rest is history.
So what about education then? Is there specialized designations in this world?
There are. There's actually a few industry organizations that are out there that are well respected. I'm very involved with what's called the Society of Settlement Planners. I'm on the board.
Mm-hmm. Nice.
And it's I like to think of us as kind of the highfalutin, we're the CFPs of the business. The standards are basically drawn from the CFP standards, and I've been through all the CFP stuff. So, we are the full settlement planners, and the designation is called the Registered Settlement Planner, which I have, the RSP, and it's pretty rigorous. It's not a joke. It is takes you through a lot of the curriculum. That is some of which is CFP curriculum. I also just got the CHFC in the last couple of years. I did this mid-career master's. Just decided to go torture myself while I had little kids and a mortgage and the whole trying to build a practice.
Soccer practice. No, I'd rather study.
Yeah, so I went and studied for the CFP, went through that education. Then I took a left turn into the CHFC because I looked at it and said, this is actually more applicable than the CFP. Mm-hmm. It has some coursework that actually speaks to disabled clients and clients that I deal with all the time. So I ended up getting the RSP and the CHFC, and the SSP sponsors the RSP. So yes, absolutely, to your point, there's credentialing and there's really been an effort in the industry to become full, comprehensive, holistic legal settlement planners. The genesis of the industry was with what are called structured brokers, which are guys that just would come in and they'd try to structure some of the settlement into an annuity, mm-hmm. and they were typically people, a lot of the older folks in the business are from claims backgrounds or insurance backgrounds, and there's nothing wrong with that. They're still doing a service, and it's well needed, but it's become so much more complex now. All the needs of the attorney around the settlement of these cases, it's just mm-hmm. a minefield.
Mm-hmm. It sounds like it.
It is. I mean, you if you're an attorney and you let a client out the door with $50,000 and they're on Medicaid, you just blew their Medicaid. And that's a problem.
Yeah.
That could be a big problem for you from a legal standpoint, from a malpractice standpoint, because that person's Medicaid benefits could be far more valuable to them than $50,000, depending on what they use their Medicaid for. So, whether it's Medicare, Medicaid, the other things we come in and advise on, it's interesting, but it's much like we used to be called stockbroker. Stockbrokers 20, 30. When I got into the business, we were called stockbrokers. I'm dating myself a little bit, right?
Yep.
And then somewhere, lo and behold, along the way in the 90s, we all became financial advisors, right? Mm-hmm. And it's much the same in this specialization area. So it's fascinating stuff. I love it, and I love the relationships and the fact that you really feel like you're helping people, and it's again, you're meeting them in the breach. It's a tough time. Hard decisions have to be made, and they got to be made. There's some urgency to the decision making too.
What's that time frame look like typically?
Well, especially as it pertains to structuring of any legal settlement mm-hmm. of this sort, it has to be written into the docs. So the client needs to make a decision fairly quickly about how much they want to structure versus how much they want to take cash, which is not an easy decision because structuring is irrevocable. So once you structure some of your money, you're irrevocably converting that legally and contractually into a stream of payments, which can only be undone by the "I want my money now" folks.
I was just going to
I would never ever counsel any of my clients to call them.
So for the layperson, I'm not going to say anybody's name, but I see these commercials where they take, and that's what they're talking about, right? So,
correct.
Okay. So
not just lawsuit structuring, but any sort of stream of payment. They'll pay you. These are factoring companies. They'll buy you out for X on the dollar, and just typically deep-pocketed hedge funds are involved in that business now. It's, if you can get a significant enough vig on it, you're going to do it, right?
That's right.
Unfortunately, lawsuit recipients are, too often preyed upon, and there's been legislation passed in a lot of states to protect them against unscrupulous folks. And not everybody's unscrupulous in that profession. There are ethical folks in that business who will sit down with a client. I mean, look, there's no such thing as a perfect financial plan, right? People are involved.
Yep.
So I could put the best plan together at the time, and in 10 years, 5 years, maybe it doesn't work anymore for whatever reason. So, for every market, there really should be a healthy secondary market.
Yeah, that's a good
in my
point.
opinion, right? I mean, there's a secondary market in everything we do in the retail world. So, and if there isn't, it's typically a problematic thing. Look at these, non-listed REITs and things like that have had such issues over the last 10 years, right?
Easily.
So it's interesting what happens on the back end of these cases if people aren't protected and aren't managed correctly. And
so once it goes to that, it's irrevocable. So they have to make that decision. They have to move pretty quick. Just listening to you talk, I just can imagine the deer in the headlight moment if somebody said, well, no, I've got my guy, I want to bring my guy in. And that advisor, who's probably brilliant on the outside of this niche market, comes in, sits down, and would be like, I'm sorry, what?
Well, sophisticated advisors come in,
Yeah.
and I always chuckle because I'm a pretty sophisticated advisor. I got my Series 7 in '93, so I've been in this business for a little bit. Look, advisors want assets. They want to manage money, and they don't, so anything that's going to something that's guaranteed and annuitized is not going to AUM
Yep.
at their firm. So I understand that. I try to work with advisors when I'm brought in because every advisor has some PI attorney buddy or family member, and they don't really know how to deal with that world, and they don't really know what a structured settlement is. It's just because it's hard. There's a lot of layers to it. So I try not to get into a war with an advisor. Typically, they're going to have a good relationship with the client. What I try to tell them is, look, we're going to give you this, and we'll put this in, and we'll put this into guaranteed income. I'm really just your bond. I'm really just the bond allocation of the portfolio when you think about it.
Yeah.
Right.
That's an interesting perspective.
It's really just a tax-free bond asset allocation when you think about it in many ways. So now you can go out and you can swing for the fences on the equity side of the portfolio, do what you do so well, which I also do, by the way. But if I'm put into the position of being the structure guy, which sometimes happens in that world, I'm happy to fill that function. Look, every advisor comes into situations and does what the client asks them to do. We all would like to think that we do everything for everybody, but that's just not the case.
No,
sometimes someone just wants you to buy them a stock, right? Or buy them some life insurance, and that's okay.
Yeah.
That's okay. And then you move from there, or maybe you're just managing the money. Maybe you're just putting it into fee-based account, whatever it may be. So
how often does that in this world, in your experience in this world, is there a lot of the settlements being big enough to where there is somebody going fee-based, taking it?
It happens pretty often.
Does it?
I've got some folks, one in particular, a gentleman that does a lot of fee-based management in this world. He's very good at it. And he understands the clients because he's dedicated himself to this niche like I have. So sometimes I'll be brought in with him, and he'll do the fee-based asset management, and I'll do the guaranteed structure component.
Nice.
And we work really well together. Because it's really the best of both worlds. I'm giving guarantee and safety and ongoing income, and he's giving growth and flexibility, right?
Nice.
So it's really it can work well. So the key is not to be greedy, and the key is to look out for the best interest of your client.
Yep.
And you do the right thing, and that's what we're all supposed to be doing, right? So everybody wants to control the relationship. I get that, but
Sometimes people do this with relationships.
Right.
And it's like, you know what, why don't we just hold hands and we can have a bigger
Yeah.
relationship overall. So speaking of relationships, so that's one side of this coin is the plaintiff.
Mm-hmm.
How do you work with attorneys? How does that side work with the financial service for litigators?
Well,
niche?
Attorneys are a completely different client profile.
Mm-hmm.
You've got high earners, recurring earnings, but irregular income, peaks and valleys. Mm-hmm. They're often, organized as partnerships or, they're organized a lot of different ways.
Sure.
Depending on the size of the firm, there's a lot of different things going on. But they do have the ability at the current time and have had the ability for a couple decades now to structure an unlimited amount of their fees, to defer their fees.
So
any amount of any fee on any case.
And when you do that, you're deferring taxation.
You're pushing the income into the future. So instead of getting, $1 million fee, you as an attorney can take $500,000 in a fee, and you can defer $500,000 in a fee through the purchase of an annuity or through some sort of a deferred comp mechanism. And of course, the caveat is always, consult your tax advisor and
exactly.
Yada, yada, yada. And the government has tried to go after this several times, but the child's case, the government's looking for revenue, right?
Of course.
And that's fine. But there is case law out there. You can pull it up, child's. And it allows attorneys to do this. It's pretty unbelievable. It's fantastic for them to be able to do that. Now, getting them to do it is sometimes a little bit challenging because they can incur tremendous expenses throughout the course of these cases. If they're certain kind of cases like medical malpractice, for instance, are very very expensive to carry because you've got to hire all sorts of experts, and it's just their carrying costs are high, but they can be very lucrative cases.
Sure.
Unfortunately, right? Because you typically will have a really terrible situation. But your job as the attorney is to get as much money for your client as you possibly can. We can't control what happened, but we can control the future if we can get them. We can take care of them. So, yeah, the fee deferral area is a fascinating area, and it's something that too few attorneys avail themselves of. Especially in my area. I told Jay earlier. South Florida. It's like Southern California, it's people are spending money before they make it. And look, and I don't want to cast attorneys as reckless with their money. They take calculated risks on their cases and are handsomely rewarded if they do a good job with their clients. But they've got a lot of risk and exposure. So, they may have other things that they may want. A lot of these guys are buying real estate. They're non-correlated, and they don't necessarily want to buy stocks. They're just they're just a little bit of a different mindset there, and I don't blame them. I've got some very, very close friends in this business. I came into this business with some very close friends who are successful in this world, but have made a lot more. So I've got a lot of respect for these guys and the work they do and the risks they take, and but I don't know how much longer that'll be on the table for them if the IRS, but for right now, it is what it is. It's something they can do and something that I think a lot of them need to be taking a hard look at.
Do they have the ability when they defer like that? Is it a year by year? Or do they have to lock into like longer?
Well, there are different mechanisms. You can go from traditional, boring old structured settlement annuity fee deferral mecanism at a fixed rate, which is a lot of them love because it's
Steady Eddie.
Yeah, steady Eddie.
Yeah.
And then you've got deferred comp mechanisms out there that will give them unfettered market access through sub accounts essentially. So it just depends, and they all have different payout mechanisms. But they all must pay out. There must be a schedule because the government wants to get paid, right?
Is there a time length on that?
It depends on it depends on the solution, but typically, I don't think most of them. Many of them go past, say, 20, 30 years.
Gotcha. That's fascinating.
Yeah. So it looks like essentially like an unlimited 401k or like a deferred comp on steroids, right? It's pretty interesting stuff.
That is pretty. That is such a neat, interesting area that is so different than most of the conversations that I ever have. Okay, so since it would pretty much be public record, and if you can't answer, this is now curiosity. What's the biggest thing you worked on? Like that you were brought in, that you were the partner?
That I landed, or that I?
Either, both, either one.
I mean, I've been brought in on $25, $50 million. You have to understand, it's, I have clients who've had $100 million verdicts, but they're knocked down on appeal, or they're, they bankrupt the defendant.
Yeah.
Or what pays out at the end of the day, post appeal is going to be lower, right?
Sure.
So, I've gotten a call in the last year on a $25 million case. It's a pretty big case, even in South Florida, which is absent California, which is the land of massive settlements, massive legal settlements, for obvious reasons. It's California. It's very liberal. It's very friendly to torts out there. But South Florida's a top 5 market too, or top 5 worst markets if you're an insurance company. They literally call it a legal hellhole.
There was a time back, now this is going to date me, but there was a time that in the insurance industry, a lot of companies will do business in all the United States, with the exception, a lot of them will limit the amount that they do in New York because the laws are different. And at one time, nobody was in Alabama. And if I recall correctly, it's because there was no cap on lawsuits. Yeah.
Well, there's medical caps on med mal and those sorts of things. I mean, there have been caps in California on certain sorts of, it's called micro. It's been law since the 70s. It's that stuff's always going on in different states with the state legislatures trying to cap fees, and because it happens. I mean, look at windstorm in Florida. I mean, if I told you what I deal with trying to get wind insurance on my home, we're all dealing with it. It's crazy. The rates are going up every year, and the lawyers blame the insurance companies, and the insurance companies blame the lawyers, and it's crazy, and that's the way it is. But yeah, we were talking about the attorneys. They I forget where we were going with that. They are definitely.
I was asking you about the biggest cases.
Right. They're definitely all over the place in terms. I mean, I get calls on 10, 15 grand sometimes. I'm like, not a lot I can do with 10, 15 grand, but if it's a kid or somebody, and then I get a call on 15, 20, $25 million. And
sure.
So it just runs the gamut.
So are you mostly, is your footprint Florida, or are you out in other states too?
I'm mostly Florida, but I'm southeast, and I can work anywhere in the country. I've gone to mediations in Philly and LA and you name it. So I mean, it's just a matter of. I mean, nowadays it's easier, right, with Zoom, everything post-COVID. I mean, I have law firms down the street that will call me and say, hey, we want you to meet with a client. Just here's a Zoom link. And they're 5, 10, 15 minutes away. But it's more a convenience thing now, right? It's I've got to get the client who's coming from over there. I got my schedule, your schedule. You're probably going to have another colleague in a whether it be a trust company or whoever it is I'm bringing into a case. You might have 4 or 5 different people you're trying to get in a room. It's hard, right?
Yeah. And so now at least everybody knows. Everybody. That's one thing that comes out of the pandemic that's good is everybody's comfort level and ability to. I could get my parents on a Zoom call in their 80s.
Absolutely.
Pre-COVID, no dice.
No, it's COVID definitely served some good purposes, right? There were some good things around that, and as much pain as it caused and tumult, but it's definitely made everybody very, very comfortable with maybe too comfortable, but maybe that's another conversation.
All right, so I have one last question for you, because of your financial background. And then your interest in law school, John Grisham novels, love them or hate them?
I've read a lot of them. I haven't read one in a while and couldn't tell you the last one I read by name, but I've read a lot of them over the years. I don't have a problem with them. They're formulaic. They're page turners. I think, if you read enough of them, I think you get to the point where you're like, I get it, John. I mean, they're great. I mean, he's been doing them for 30 years? And the firm came out in 91?
A long time.
Heck, I think it was a movie in 91, 92. So the book came out in probably the late 80s. So, but I like his stuff. And I've read some of it just to help me get better at my job. And it has helped.
Now we're all going to have to go back. I think it was.
Who reads anymore? By the way, I have little kids. I read on the plane on the way up here, which was fantastic. That's what I love about flying.
There's that. We'll all have to. It was with Matt Damon and Claire Danes, but the book was he's suing insurance companies.
Yeah, that's.
I want to say it's The Rainmaker, but that seems like too easy.
I think you're right.
It could be.
I think you might be right.
We may all have to go read that again.
Yeah, that came out in the 90s.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, that's there's some good subject matter. But look, what I would tell advisors is, don't try to tackle this on your own. It's I'm happy. I mean, I'm not looking for any sort of anything here other than I want plaintiffs to get good advice. And I think that it's just a minefield. It's a minefield. It took me a long time to figure everything else out.
It seems like it's very, very, very. It's more nuanced than I thought. Now, when I came into this conversation, I'm like, that seems pretty nuanced. And now it's like, holy smokes.
I haven't even really honestly scratched the surface. We didn't even talk about liens and hospital bills, which are a major part of the puzzle at settlement that has to be dealt with before anybody gets a dollar.
See, now that's a teaser for having you back right there.
Subrogation is a big deal. I mean, you got to pay these people that have paid all the medical bills back.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, you're not going to just walk without paying the people that have paid sometimes millions of dollars in medical bills have been paid. So that's a big issue for these law firms. A huge area of there are companies out there that are just doing that now. They just do negotiation of liens and bills, and it's a huge business. And
that is interesting. See, that's a good tease. We're gonna wrap, but you went and said something interesting. So you're coming back. You got to come back. We have to talk about that on another episode because that's fascinating. So. Yeah. Sean, I thank you for coming out, man. Thanks for being here.
Great to be here. I enjoyed it, and go Knowles.
There we go. No, wait, what? Rock Chalk Jayhawk. That's what you're supposed to say.
In basketball, we'll go Rock Chalk Jayhawk, and in football, we'll go Knowles.
We can go with that.
All right.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
This podcast is for financial professional use only and not for use with the general public. The information provided is the exclusive property of Creative One and is protected by copyright and other intellectual property laws of the United States. This material has been prepared for informational and educational purposes only. It is not intended to provide, and should not be relied upon for, accounting, legal, tax or investment advice. Creative One is not responsible for the results of programs discussed on this podcast or any liability stemming from the use of it. Although we may promote or recommend the services offered by this company, agents are ultimately responsible for the use of any materials or services and agree to comply with the compliance requirements of their broker-dealer and registered investment advisor, if applicable, and the insurance carriers they represent. Copyright 2022, Creative One Marketing Corporation.